After our allies, the Chitters, had taken that planet and freed all the slaves from it and destroyed all the slave masters, of course, it was pretty evident that there was many more slave species out there than we had anticipated. We started coming across onesie twosies of different species we'd never ever seen before. Some of them were just like the masters. They were reptilian, avian, amphibian, aquatic, mammalian, you name it. It was all there. Though they all had a similar humanoid exterior. Some still only had 3 digits, others had 7. In one case, a person, well, if you call him that, he had a strange appendage on the end of his hand which had kind of a tentacle attached to it. And he only had 2 fingers and 1 thumb, plus the tentacle. That it was just funky. Yes, he was an aquatic species. However, we had never seen this before. We didn't know how to deal with it. We did our best, of course. I made it a point to keep jumping around between soul space to make sure everything was okay, along with checking in on the Zells, especially Junior and his family, and checking in with the Chitters to see if there's anything else I could help them with. To my surprise, they actually offered me a few others. As they had taken so many slaves and freed them, they were having troubles taking care of everyone. I looked and said, I don't have a lot of room here. But thankfully, my crew had learned from me, and I was grateful for that. They actually decided that they would actually double up their rooms if it meant that they could free more of their own kind, which I fully understood that. There weren't that many, but I did more than double my crew. In fact, I had to give up my own quarters so that 3 others could stay there. 3 very young ones, at least from the outset. The strange thing is, these genetically designed ones, they're not always the same looking. As I stated before, they're sometimes different colors just to look kind of pretty. They all look pretty. Their skin is pristine. Their teeth are always perfect. Their eyes are always locked in on something. But they sometimes have different eyes. Sometimes it's almost reptilian or cat eyes. Most of the time it's human shaped. But other ones have horns. Some have long ears. I saw one, unfortunately, that one didn't make it. But the dude had a tail. What the hell do you need a tail for? Then I saw who the master was, which is a reptilian. Oy, I just twisted my guts even thinking about what he had been forced to do. Ugh. All in all, I called for extra reinforcements, but didn't have to take too long. Apparently the word had gotten out, and everyone was trying to figure out what to do with the refugees as much as possible. The human fleet, at least 2 of the battle groups, showed up with all sorts of frigates I've never seen before. Each of them actually landed on the planet and had their own fabricators. They were actually flying fabricators, if you want to figure that one out. And each of them was designed specifically to land and help build structures, to build habitation for each of these, to actually have farm equipment created so that they could start living on this planet. The planet itself was slightly agrarian already, so it didn't take much at all to clear some land, plant some crops, and within a couple of weeks you got sprouts coming up, and if nothing else, you can eat those. The only problem is a few of the species were strict carnivores. This made things difficult. However, even carnivores can eat things that come out of the organic fabricators, although they didn't exactly like it. During this whole ordeal, I started asking around and seeing, since I have such a crew, maybe I should upgrade to a larger ship. The problem is, everybody wanted a ship. Everybody wanted to use the large fabricators. Everybody wanted bigger, better, and just be ready for the next assault. Because everybody was still pissed off. And I can't say that I blame them. I would sit and listen to some of my crew and some of the new crew talk about what they had gone through. And the best I could do was to use the organic fabricator and get them a facsimile of like hot chocolate or maybe coffee, which is okay, but it doesn't taste like the real thing, if you know what the real thing tastes like. Think of it the difference between processed foods and real food. Processed foods, yeah, you can eat it, but as far as taste goes and the effects on the body is nothing compared to true, organically grown or raised food. Which was the kicker of it all. Now that Earth was pretty much a no-go zone, as Earth itself had to heal, we had to worry about how we would also pay for these fabricators, pay for our time on it. And it came down to one simple thing. The kicker of it was our fabricators. We could take any type of inorganic matter and make any type of device there was, but you can't eat it. And organic and inorganic fabricators work in very different ways, although basically come out with the same idea. Now, if you think about it, Earth would be a bountiful place full of organic matter that we could harvest and raise, and it wouldn't be hard to feed an entire population. Hell, we were feeding 5 times this population on the planet before we even went to space, before we even had organic fabricators. But now we're in trouble. Earth was pretty much done. The hydroponics bays on the moons and other satellites were functional, but at least 50% of them were damaged or out and out destroyed. Mars lucked out in one way, even though they had lost most of their crops due to the orbital bombardment. They could simply replant, and they did have enough to keep their livestock alive. Their livestock had been pulled down into the underground bunkers when the bombardment started, so most of it did survive. But Mars, the population was extremely small, and it was going to take a very, very, very long time before they were able to produce enough food to even feed a battle group, let alone an entire armada, as we were building up the way we were. Venus did get away fairly unscathed, but they were a fairly new colony and were not truly set. When they sold crops, they were getting payments of extremely high amounts. We're talking weeks on the fabricators, along with materials that they wanted to work with. It was insane. And this became the new currency. The new currency was organic matter. True, grown, or raised food. It was insane to think about this, that we would have to skimp along. We're in the freaking space age, and here we are looking to figure out a way to feed ourselves with actual real food. Now, don't get me wrong, the fabricators will work for a while, but eventually you will be starving just to bite into an orange, just for any type of real food. And to our complete relief, the Zells were more than happy to share their crops with us. The only issue was, since they're so little, they don't actually grow a lot. Most of the crops on their planet don't produce all that much. Though we are grateful for what's there, we never, ever, ever, ever told them that it was barely a drop in the bucket compared to what we needed. The only time anyone said anything was about 2 seconds before somebody clocked them, just telling them to shut the hell up. These were some of our greatest allies, and we didn't have to piss them off, and they're being extremely kind to us as well. The chitters not so much, as they very delicately balanced the way they consume food and the amounts with how many they produce. The queens were very, very particular about this. Being of a hive mind, they made it very easy to understand how many there were, how much food there was, how much water there was, and figure out how many of their own personnel they needed. With this, I fully understood. If we were a hive mind, I'm sure we would do the same thing. So we were stuck with those stupid energy bars that really didn't actually taste like anything, at least for a long time. We did luck out, and inside many of the asteroids inside the asteroid belt, we did find a common mineral which we can consume, which for a while sold for a lot but didn't sell for much after everybody found large reserves of natural sodium chloride, aka salt. Yes, you do need salt to survive, but too much is bad for you, even now. Even with our insane medical technology that keeps us looking so young and our insides so clean, you still don't want to get too much into the salt. As I went back towards the fleet and I went to the far side of Luna, I saw that they had finally finished constructing the large fabricators. And when I say large, I mean freaking huge. The space station itself was at least half the size of Luna herself, which is the reason why they kept it away from Luna. God help you if that thing got caught in a gravity well. It's going down, and there ain't nothing you can do to stop it. I don't care how much anti-grav motors or how many thrusters you throw on this thing, it's going to get pulled down. Especially if you get near something like Jupiter. Yikes. All in all, I still ended up docking and tried to trade as best I could. A few of the folks in there started giving my crew a little bit of the side eye. And I don't mean evil side eye. I mean, hey, you want something to trade? Well, we can trade with... And I remember pulling my weapon and putting it right into his face and said, I dare you to finish that sentence. When he saw me pull the hammer back, he realized I was serious. And that's when his own boss came over. Whoa, 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 what's going on? I told him what his subordinate had said. His senior just looked at me and said, I'll take care of it. That won't happen twice. I simply retracted my pistol, reset the hammer, and pasted it back inside its holster. And just as I did that, the senior looked at him and said, What is wrong with you? Hit him upside the back of the head, and then dragged him back, cursing and kicking at him. You stupid! What is wrong with... At that point, my new crew had realized that I take their protection very, very seriously. And they still referred to me by the little nickname that Junior had given me. They all called me Godfather. I guess that would be a good enough call sign if it wasn't already taken. However, it was still interesting to hear it. At least they're not trying to call me uncle. Only a few people ever call me that, and most of them aren't around anymore. I take that one personal. Still, we continued on to the station, and I got a hold of someone who could actually give me some time on the fabricators. I told him I had all the materials needed to build the damn thing. It's just I would need to wait my turn. I asked him how long that was going to be. He gave me kind of a side eye and said, well, looks like it's going to be about 15 months. So I'm not waiting 15 months, and I can see your screen. Try 5 months at most. He grabbed his screen, turned it sideways, and said, nope, you must have misread it because I'm looking right at it. Don't give me that crap. It went back and forth like that for a while, and then finally, I got a hold of someone I knew. One of the former captains of a destroyer. Unfortunately, his destroyer had taken a few hits, enough that they had to scrap it. He was still a good commander. And I knew him personal from back at the academy. I should know because I taught him myself. I was able to talk to him in his own quarters. He did look at my crew a little suspiciously and asked me many questions on how it was to deal with them. And I simply had them talk to him. And it was less than a minute before they realized that every single one of my crew was just as competent as I said they would be. He was so happy about this and actually said, maybe I should get a few of them on my own crew. Well, given the type of crew you got now, I would really worry about that. What? He asked me, and then I explained what had happened before. As I was, he started jotting down notes. He goes, I'll take care of that myself. All right. Well, tell you what, can you look into some time on the fabricator? I'd like to make a ship with this design, with these specifications as well. Sliding those papers across the desk towards him. He picked them up and read them, and I realized that his eyes just started to get very, very wide. What the hell is this? Is this a frigate? More or less. More of a cargo hauler than anything else, but yeah. I guess you could call it a frigate. It's definitely not a destroyer. There's not enough guns on it. Huh. He continued to look over each of the specifications, and then he pulled up his own display and began to type everything in. Started to move everything around, and for the next hour or two, not only did me and him start talking about all the different things we wanted to do along with the layout, I called my crew over and asked them what amenities they wanted. Of course, it wasn't surprising who wanted what. Many of the men wanted a larger game room with more games in it, if at all possible. They also wanted some sort of workout area. The ladies, well, they wanted, of course, their own private bath facilities, if they could, and they insisted on having the communal bath as well. I could only afford to have one shower in each room, a small, basically just a shower stall, the same you would find in any of the old style ships that people used to take cruises in. Yeah, something about that big for each person. And then, of course, the one bath. They all agreed to that. I also had the engines increased. I also had the amount of payload it could carry increased as well. It did quite get close to bordering on a destroyer, if you really want to put it that way. But the kicker is there was a lot of room for cargo. What I didn't specify at first is that we had the fighters, and the fighters were not getting refabricated. They were simply getting removed and then placed in this new ship. When all was said and done, it came down to payment. What could I pay with? I simply pulled up a small piece of paper. He's like, "Why you got it written down?" "Well, I don't need other people knowing this, or my ship might get mauled." And I handed the paper over. He opened it up, and he read, and his eyes got really, really wide. What I had never told him is that I had spent many, many years on a farm, so I knew how to raise crops. I also had a stash of seeds inside my ship, just in case I ended up crashing somewhere and needed to grow my own plants. Everything was there. We had separated one of the areas, actually had to pull out the communal bath, which is why the girls were so insistent that they wanted one again. But this time I had set up grow lights, got a hold of soil, which thankfully the Zells had allowed us to get, but we also had to use our own waste to compost it. The whole area stunk to, oh, good God. We always wanted to keep that bulkhead door shut because everyone knew when somebody walked out. That being said, it did allow the plants to grow well. I had several bushels of cucumbers, squash, zucchinis, but the big one was tomatoes. Tomatoes were extremely highly prized, worth a hell of a lot of money. I had exactly how much quantity we had to spare. I was going to save just a little bit for the crew, as they would end up having a small party before we ended up defabricating the ship itself. But the look on his face, and I swear I started to see drool coming off. As I stated before, the biggest piece of currency is now food, and now he's looking at true, organic, non-genetically modified food, all ripe and ready to be picked. With that, we were pushed up. We were third in line, and I was grateful for this. Our new ship, well, I was waiting for it as we watched our old ship get defabricated. Watching it being stripped down from the skin out, the hull being stripped away, basically atomized as particles so small that the human eyes just can't pick it up. Surprisingly, my crew could say that they saw a strange, almost dust cloud coming off and were being sucked into the fabricator itself. I can't see it, but their eyes must be enhanced. But as the outer hull was stripped away, I saw each of the rooms. I saw the engine compartment, the bridge. My command couch eventually was just taken and particleized and pulled up into God knows where, all the way through each of the areas. Our fighters were outside just waiting. They weren't docked. They were just floating outside. I had them all locked into one, and thankfully the girls inside weren't trying to do anything stupid. They were just remote controlling the fighters so that they didn't crash into each other. Thankfully, in the vacuum of space, the majority of times you don't have to do anything, it just sit there. And then, once our ship was defabricated, the new fabrication process started. Oh boy, I was excited. The new engines, as they were being put together, looked extremely slick. The new spin drives that were there. And yes, they were all based on spin anyway, which is why people still use the phrase spinning the engines up. But the new spin drives were a bit more complex, but they were smaller, much smaller. It almost looked like centrifuges, those that were attached to it. Instead of having a dozen of these centrifuge-looking turbine-ish, I don't know how to truly explain it. Again, I've never truly been an engineer. But instead of a dozen of these large ones, big enough for basically my torso, there was 36, only about the size of my forearm. But they were all still about 4 or 5 meters long. It was crazy how intricate this thing could make them. But because it was so intricate, it took a long time, a very long time. Much of the fabricator, after it had done the actual framework, had to wait until the engine compartment was finished before it continue on with the rest of the ship. As each of the pieces were put together, I could actually feel the excitement of my crew. They were so happy to see their new ship. It was much larger than our own. Over 4 times larger than my Corvette. Actually, so much so that I kind of wish I could have kept the old Corvette, but I needed the materials to build this thing. Eventually, I knew I would have one attached to the side. There wasn't enough room inside to actually put the Corvette, but plenty of room for the fighters. However, that would have to wait until later. I saw the gun emplacements being put in, and all I could do was hope that everything went well. For several days it took for my ship to be built. I was so grateful for this. Every time I went up to see it, it was like watching a ship being built in fast forward. And of course, I had to go back and make sure that my payment had gone over well. Well, not only had it gone over well, but apparently some folks had forgotten how to farm, and I just was like, really, guys? Don't you understand the basics here? Many people had forgotten this because they had become too reliant on the fabricators. When they first actually bit into an ear of corn, they couldn't believe how delicious it was. And this was just corn. Although, when talking to my friend, my former commander student, if you will, he simply stated, and the dumbass forgot to cook it first, and he still said it was great. It's like, well, yeah, of course you can eat it raw. It's still funny to watch. I just kind of shook my head. But as my ship was being built, I looked around to the other fabricators, and much of what I saw actually surprised me. Many of these ships were being personalized. Anything frigate size and smaller was personalized. Destroyers themselves were pretty much standard, but I could tell that with each generation the guns were getting bigger and stronger. They were strapping more and more missiles and torpedoes in them. The engines again were being upgraded. I looked around and I could see many other ships besides frigates and destroyers. There was a lot of corvettes now, a lot of them. But there was also battleships. It was freakish to see one moving at what they consider dock speed, whatever the hell dock speed is. And it just passed by, and it took several minutes for the ship to go by. And all I could think of is, are we trying to take out entire planets again? Oh wait, yes we are. Sort of. But that wasn't what worried me. And what surprised me truly was the fact that I had been told that the new massive fabricators that were designed specifically to build dreadnoughts were building something other than dreadnoughts. What are you gotta be kidding me. It took a while to walk all the way to the other side of the station so I could actually see what the hell was going on and confirm what he told me. But sure enough, I'm looking at a goddamn carrier. Now, carriers in space don't look anything like they do on the terrestrial battlefield, except for one small area that seems like a flight deck. That's it. All the rest are simply compartments strapped around the engine, with small short-range gun emplacements spotted here, there, and everywhere. There wasn't any place I could see for missiles or torpedoes except for one small area on the ventral and dorsal side. I'm guessing those were more like decoys or something. But the rest was simply set up not only to send and receive fighters, but as I'm sitting there looking, I was given an explanation that it's basically its own floating space station now. "Are you serious?" I asked him. "Oh, serious as a heart attack," he said. Then he went on to explain that each of these ships was designed to be out on its own permanently. I was amazed at this. Up to this point, our ships hadn't had this capacity. They had to come back for a refit at least every few years, maybe a decade. Even if they were well maintained, it still would take a lot to keep a ship out there permanently. I mean, seriously, are we really going to be out in space for this long? How long is it going to take for the damn planet to heal itself? And then I wanted to smack myself for even asking that question, considering I was there and I saw at least one of those ships put that goddamn heat beam across. Oh, crap, I thought to myself. Well, I guess if this is what's come to, I guess this is our new life out here in the stars. I kind of hugged my head a little bit as I went back to see my new ship. It still wasn't finished, but it was getting there. And as it finally was completed, I was giving a notification to come out and check it. As I walked through the ship, I brought my entire crew with me, minus those that were still out in the fighters. We went from room to room, making sure everything was good, opening up every hatch and making sure there was no busted seals or anything like that. We found that every single amenity we had asked for was there, but absolutely nothing else. No extra entertainment that we didn't ask for specifically. No extra workout equipment, no extra sensors, no anything like that. Even though the sensor array was also upgraded, since the standard sensor array was outdated, it was still exactly what we expected it to be. And I was so grateful for that, and so was my crew. My crew had gotten to the point where I needed this many just to run a frigate this size. And then as we got in, I strapped into the command couch and I locked in using the sensors and using the neural implant. And to my amazement, there was no pain this time. Usually there was a slight pinch as you locked in, but those glorious engineers had figured it out. And I was able to run through all the different systems one by one. Even though in real time it only looked like I was sitting there for maybe 30 seconds, I must have been going through every system for at least 6 or 8 hours. And then I got back up, looked over at the captain, got up and shook his hand, said, "It's perfect." My crew was already happy with this, and I asked him how soon until I could leave the fabricator. He simply said, "Can you wait till I get off of this tub?" I laughed at him and said, "You got it. Tell you what, you need anything else, you call me. Hey, you deliver me another load of those wonderful vegetables and we will call it good. Very good. I mean, they were delicious." I looked at him and said, "You think that's good? Give me a year." He looked at me sideways for a moment, but I had already done a kind of a sly deal, which hopefully would bear fruit, literally. When the ship finally left the fabricator, I made sure that the cargo bay doors opened as soon as we cleared the dock so that we could latch in all the fighters. Thankfully, everything was automated. The new AI systems that were on there were unbelievably good and intuitive as well. They worked with all the crew. As soon as I was able to register each of them as a crew member, the AI was able to work with them without even the slightest problem. In fact, the AI began to siphon off different parts of its personality, which I thought was strange, but it is what it is. And each of the crew had basically their own small AI with them. They carried it around in kind of a wristwatch type of thing. It was a little bigger than a wristwatch, but still, there it was. Everyone with their own personal AI assistant. I again worried about the moral conundrum of having them serve us, but, well, one battle at a time. Now that I cleared the moorings and everything, I decided I wanted to show this ship off just a little bit. I told my crew that we were heading towards Junior's planet. They all looked over at me, and they seemed to grin and nod. As we were heading over, even though it took several days to get there, everyone seemed to be grateful for the ship. It was just what they wanted. Most of us spent our time working out. The ship was mostly automated at this point and would alert us if something else happened. So I spent most of my time exercising or inside the hydroponics bay, as hydroponics are not something I'm very good with. I'm usually good with soil, but with hydroponics we can actually grow a whole lot faster. All in all said, though, it was a pretty uneventful trip. But when we pulled into Zell space, I saw something that I was almost not expecting, but I'm grateful for. Right next to the human battle group that had been protecting the planet was the Zell's entire fleet. I was amazed. I contacted them, let them know I was a friendly coming towards them and who I was going to visit. They didn't have a problem after they saw my ship and my registration number. And down towards the planet I went. But as I was heading towards the surface, I passed by them. And wow, they took a lot of cues from us. Every single one of their ship was just covered in turrets. It didn't matter what sides. They even had turrets sticking out the ass end of these things. Although I wondered why they didn't use as many gravimetric-style drives as we did. They seemed to like a lot more of the fusion reaction drives, but hey, to each their own. Maybe they're just not ready for that yet. I was hoping that at least they figured out artificial gravity at this point. All in all, what I saw was surprising. There was a couple fighters going around. They were very, very small, about the size of the drones we had faced before from another enemy force. But because the Zells are so small, the drones don't have to be all that big. And neither do their fighters. It's crazy. It would be almost impossible for any turret to actually lock on to these guys if they were bobbing and weaving, pushing to the point of their organic capacity, i.e., making sure their body don't go splat on the side of the cockpit from all the G-forces you're pushing. Along with that, they did have their own style of corvettes, frigates, destroyers, battleships. I didn't see any dreadnoughts or carriers yet, but I'm sure they were on their way. I didn't see anything on the sensors of massive fabricators, but I wouldn't put it past them in the next couple of years. As I headed towards the small spaceport that was right next to the village where Junior and his family was, I kind of laughed because this was going to be kind of unannounced. I had a little bit of trouble going down. Even though the Zell planet is a light gravity planet, the anti-gravity motors were having a hell of a time keeping this tub from flipping. It was just crazy. I realized at that point there was no way I'd be able to get this thing down on Earth and then get it actually out of the atmosphere again. So, hey, you take the good with the bad at this point. But when I landed, everyone was surprised. They expected a whole bunch of cargo to come out, but I hadn't picked any up yet. Instead, it was just me and the crew. We walked around, but as soon as the doors opened, I had to actually snap back at my crew. Put something else on. Seriously, what is it with this, folks, and not wearing a lot of clothes? It's annoying. Don't they ever listen? At least put your suit on. Where's your flight suit? Ugh. Anyway, we didn't get very far, and all I heard was somebody scream, "Godfather!" as they all ran over. I got down on one knee just so I was low enough so they could jump into my arms. Each of them came up to give me a hug, and I asked how they were doing. And soon after, I introduced my new crew. We spent the rest of 2 days there talking and conversing how things were going. And, to my shock and surprise, one of the things they offered me was some actual homegrown food. I was worried about taking any seeds or anything into my own ship, as it might cross-contaminate with other things, and we had to keep everything as organic as possible. But you know what? Somebody offers you a free meal, you take it. We talked about how the Zells were starting to create their own fleet, and pretty soon they wouldn't need us around. In fact, if we took off with their fleet, along with the defense satellites, they could probably take on anybody who came their way. Hell, they'd already taken care of one incursion. I could see the look in their eyes. They were, for the first time, living without fear. And this put a smile on my face. Although I had to duck the smile a little bit, because human smiles are still considered an aggressive thing to look at, baring teeth and all. However, the Zells didn't seem to mind. In fact, they let me in on something. They were ready. I asked them, ready for what? Junior's dad said they were ready to take the fight to the enemy. He pulled up a map, and I began to look at it. He explained that the nearest 2 sectors towards the galactic center were in infighting. Not only were they having internal problems, rebellions and such, but their militaries were interested in beating the crap out of each other. Why was this? You had 2 slaver nations that bordered this area. The 2 species that were in those, the indigenous species that were actually a slave species. And the Zells now took this sort of thing personal. They wanted to free at least one. They had contacted the Chitters, and the Chitters were more than willing to help them out. So I asked, so did you talk to Terran Command on this? Oh yes, oh yes. They are more than interested. More guns, more of us. We should be able to take the planet without too much issue. However, we need to take it quickly before they are able to send out any type of distress call. Terran Command says they can set up jammers to stop them. Jammers, ooh, gonna be fun. We're gonna take these slavers and we're gonna kick their butts. I kind of chuckled at this, as that was strictly a human phrase that they had picked up. I looked at the map, studied it very quickly, and I realized that it was very far from those slave masters' homeworlds. Since it's farther from their home systems, they were good targets. I simply stated to them, make sure you only go after one at a time. If you go after both, we're in trouble. With that, they understood. Eventually, I found myself talking to not only the Zell's High Command, but also Terran High Command. They appreciated my input on all of this. However, I couldn't see where I was adding anything else their own folks hadn't thought of. But sometimes an outside perspective is good to have. Turns out they did have a type of frigate that was a jammer, a radar jammer of some sorts. I didn't ask them for specifics, but apparently as soon as they're in there, they can jump to the outer part of the sector and block any incoming or outgoing transmissions. This should make things a lot easier, as we didn't have to worry as much about approaching enemy fleets. And if they didn't respond, well, all I can say to those on a planet is, ready or not, here we come.